The alarm bells rang through every corridor of Helios 9 space station. Red warning lights flashed in steady rhythm, making everyone stop what they were doing. Something was coming. Something big. Commander Tae Yang stood in the control room, his hands gripping the edge of the console. His face was pale as he stared at the screen. The other officers around him whispered nervously to each other. They had never seen their commander look so worried before. "Sir, the vessel is requesting permission to dock," said one of the communication officers. Her voice shook slightly. Tae Yang took a deep breath. "Grant permission. But I want every security team ready. Full weapons. Nobody gets close to that docking bay without my direct order." The station was home to over 10,000 people from dozens of different alien species. Humans, Threxians, Belorians, and many others lived and worked together in peace. But today that peace felt very fragile. The ship that approached was ancient. Its hull was made of metal that nobody had seen in thousands of years. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with a faint red light. The ship moved slowly, almost carefully, as if it knew everyone was watching. When the ship finally docked, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Security teams took their positions around the docking bay. Their weapons were charged and ready. Behind them, heavy blast doors stood open, ready to slam shut at the first sign of danger. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then slowly the ship's door opened. He stepped out into the harsh lights of the docking bay. Krevthor was massive. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body covered in armor that looked like black glass. The armor seemed to be part of his skin, fused directly to his body in ways that made no sense to modern science. His face was mostly hidden behind a helmet, but his eyes were visible. They glowed red, bright and burning like hot coals in the darkness. Every security officer took a step back. Some of them raised their weapons higher, fingers hovering over triggers. The alien warrior stood perfectly still, his head moving slowly as he looked around the bay. He was studying them just as much as they were studying him. "By the stars," whispered one of the Threxian guards. "It's really him. It's one of them, the Velkari." Even the name made people afraid. 3,000 years ago, they had nearly conquered the entire galaxy. They were the most feared warriors anyone had ever known. Their ships destroyed entire planets. Their soldiers never showed mercy. The wars lasted for centuries and killed billions, then suddenly they disappeared. Every single Velkari vanished in a single year. Nobody knew how or why. Most people thought they were all dead. The galaxy had celebrated their disappearance and tried to forget the nightmare they had caused. But now, one stood in the docking bay of Helios 9, the last of his kind. Commander Tae Yang arrived at the observation deck above the bay. He looked down at the warrior through the thick protective glass. His hand touched the communication panel. "Attention, all station personnel," his voice echoed through every speaker on Helios 9. "We have an unexpected visitor. For your safety, all civilians must stay at least 100 meters away from the quarantine sector. This is not optional. Security teams will enforce this order. I repeat, stay away from the quarantine sector." Down in the bay, Krevthor still had not moved. 47 weapons were pointed at him. He could have attacked. He could have tried to escape. Instead, he simply stood there waiting. "What do we do with him, sir?" asked the security chief. A human named Dalho Taeyang rubbed his tired eyes. "Take him to Quarantine Bay 7. It's the most secure cell we have. Keep the energy barriers at maximum. 20 guards on rotation always. If he moves wrong, if he even looks aggressive, lock down the entire sector." "Yes, sir. And what about diplomatic contact?" "Let the council know. They'll want to send someone. But nobody gets close to him, nobody. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir." Moving Krevthor to the quarantine bay took an hour. The warrior walked slowly, following the drone lights that guided him. He did not resist. He did not speak. Security forces surrounded him at all times, but he paid them no attention. It was as if they were not even there. The quarantine bay was a large room made of pure white metal. Energy barriers hummed at the entrance, strong enough to stop a warship's blast. Inside, there was only a sleeping platform and a small area for basic needs. No windows. No comfort. Just a cell. Krevthor entered without being told. He stood in the center of the room and waited. The barriers activated behind him with a loud snap of power. He was trapped, but he did not look trapped. He looked patient. News spread fast through the station. Within hours, everyone knew about the Velkari warrior. People gathered in groups, talking in worried voices. Some wanted him thrown out of the airlock. Others wanted him studied. A few brave souls suggested trying to talk to him. In the lower decks, where the maintenance crews worked, a young woman named Jiwoo heard the news while fixing a broken cooling system. She was covered in grease, her hair tied back in a messy knot, and she was currently arguing with a stubborn pipe that refused to connect properly. "Did you hear?" said her co-worker Sungmin as he handed her a wrench. "They brought a Valkyrie on board." "An actual Valkyrie?" Jiwoo grunted as she tightened a bolt. "I heard. Everyone's heard. The whole station won't shut up about it. Aren't you scared?" "Scared of what?" "He's locked up, isn't he?" Jiwoo wiped sweat from her forehead. "Besides, I've got bigger problems. This cooling system is 30 years old and held together with hope and spare parts. That's scarier than any ancient warrior." Sungmin shook his head. "You're crazy. Everyone else is terrified and you're worried about pipes." "Someone has to keep this station running," Jiwoo said. "Let the diplomats worry about our visitor. I've got work to do." But even as she said it, Jiwoo found herself curious. She had heard the stories about the Valkyrie, of course. Everyone had. They were the monsters that parents used to scare children into behaving, the great evil that the galaxy had barely survived. But they were also just stories to her. The wars had happened 3,000 years ago. No human alive had ever seen a Valkyrie. Earth had not even been part of the galactic community back then. Humans were still living in caves when the Valkyrie were conquering stars. So what was he really like, this last warrior? Was he really a monster? Or was he just someone from a different time, lost and alone? Jiwoo pushed the thoughts away and went back to her work. She had pipes to fix and systems to maintain. The station needed her skills, and she was not about to let everyone down just because some ancient alien had shown up. But late that night, when her shift finally ended, Jiwoo found herself walking past one of the observation screens. It showed a live feed from the quarantine bay. She stopped and stared. Krevthor stood in the exact center of his cell, perfectly still. He had not moved in hours. His glowing red eyes stared straight ahead at nothing. He looked like a statue frozen in time. Jiwoo watched him for a long moment. Then she shook her head and walked away. She had no idea that in a few weeks everything would change. She had no idea that she would be the one to change it. The alarm bells rang through every corridor of Helios 9 space station. Red warning lights flashed in steady rhythm, making everyone stop what they were doing. Something was coming. Something big. Commander Tae Yang stood in the control room, his hands gripping the edge of the console. His face was pale as he stared at the screen. The other officers around him whispered nervously to each other. They had never seen their commander look so worried before. "Sir, the vessel is requesting permission to dock," said one of the communication officers. Her voice shook slightly. Tae Yang took a deep breath. "Grant permission. But I want every security team ready. Full weapons. Nobody gets close to that docking bay without my direct order." The station was home to over 10,000 people from dozens of different alien species. Humans, Threxians, Balorians, and many others lived and worked together in peace. But today that peace felt very fragile. The ship that approached was ancient. Its hull was made of metal that nobody had seen in thousands of years. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with a faint red light. The ship moved slowly, almost carefully, as if it knew everyone was watching. When the ship finally docked, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Security teams took their positions around the docking bay. Their weapons were charged and ready. Behind them, heavy blast doors stood open, ready to slam shut at the first sign of danger. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then slowly the ship's door opened. He stepped out into the harsh lights of the docking bay. Krevthor was massive. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body covered in armor that looked like black glass. The armor seemed to be part of his skin, fused directly to his body in ways that made no sense to modern science. His face was mostly hidden behind a helmet, but his eyes were visible. They glowed red, bright and burning like hot coals in the darkness. Every security officer took a step back. Some of them raised their weapons higher, fingers hovering over triggers. The alien warrior stood perfectly still, his head moving slowly as he looked around the bay. He was studying them just as much as they were studying him. "By the stars," whispered one of the Threxian guards. "It's really him. It's one of them, the Valkyrie." Even the name made people afraid. 3,000 years ago, they had nearly conquered the entire galaxy. They were the most feared warriors anyone had ever known. Their ships destroyed entire planets. Their soldiers never showed mercy. The wars lasted for centuries and killed billions, then suddenly they disappeared. Every single Valkyrie vanished in a single year. Nobody knew how or why. Most people thought they were all dead. The galaxy had celebrated their disappearance and tried to forget the nightmare they had caused. But now, one stood in the docking bay of Helios 9, the last of his kind. Commander Taiyang arrived at the observation deck above the bay. He looked down at the warrior through the thick protective glass. His hand touched the communication panel. "Attention, all station personnel," his voice echoed through every speaker on Helios 9. "We have an unexpected visitor. For your safety, all civilians must stay at least 100 meters away from the quarantine sector. This is not optional. Security teams will enforce this order. I repeat, stay away from the quarantine sector." Down in the bay, Krevthor still had not moved. 47 weapons were pointed at him. He could have attacked. He could have tried to escape. Instead, he simply stood there waiting. "What do we do with him, sir?" asked the security chief. A human named Dalho Taiyang rubbed his tired eyes. "Take him to Quarantine Bay 7. It's the most secure cell we have. Keep the energy barriers at maximum. 20 guards on rotation always. If he moves wrong, if he even looks aggressive, lock down the entire sector." "Yes, sir. And what about diplomatic contact?" "Let the council know. They'll want to send someone. But nobody gets close to him, nobody. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir." Moving Krevthor to the quarantine bay took an hour. The warrior walked slowly, following the drone lights that guided him. He did not resist. He did not speak. Security forces surrounded him at all times, but he paid them no attention. It was as if they were not even there. The quarantine bay was a large room made of pure white metal. Energy barriers hummed at the entrance, strong enough to stop a warship's blast. Inside, there was only a sleeping platform and a small area for basic needs. No windows. No comfort. Just a cell. Krevthor entered without being told. He stood in the center of the room and waited. The barriers activated behind him with a loud snap of power. He was trapped, but he did not look trapped. He looked patient. News spread fast through the station. Within hours, everyone knew about the Valkyrie warrior. People gathered in groups, talking in worried voices. Some wanted him thrown out of the airlock. Others wanted him studied. A few brave souls suggested trying to talk to him. In the lower decks, where the maintenance crews worked, a young woman named Jiwoo heard the news while fixing a broken cooling system. She was covered in grease, her hair tied back in a messy knot, and she was currently arguing with a stubborn pipe that refused to connect properly. "Did you hear?" said her co-worker Sungmin as he handed her a wrench. "They brought a Valkyrie on board." "An actual Valkyrie?" Jiwoo grunted as she tightened a bolt. "I heard. Everyone's heard. The whole station won't shut up about it. Aren't you scared?" "Scared of what?" "He's locked up, isn't he?" Jiwoo wiped sweat from her forehead. "Besides, I've got bigger problems. This cooling system is 30 years old and held together with hope and spare parts. That's scarier than any ancient warrior." Sungmin shook his head. "You're crazy. Everyone else is terrified and you're worried about pipes." "Someone has to keep this station running," Jiwoo said. "Let the diplomats worry about our visitor. I've got work to do." But even as she said it, Jiwoo found herself curious. She had heard the stories about the Valkyrie, of course. Everyone had. They were the monsters that parents used to scare children into behaving, the great evil that the galaxy had barely survived. But they were also just stories to her. The wars had happened 3,000 years ago. No human alive had ever seen a Valkyrie. Earth had not even been part of the galactic community back then. Humans were still living in caves when the Valkyrie were conquering stars. So what was he really like, this last warrior? Was he really a monster? Or was he just someone from a different time, lost and alone? Jiwoo pushed the thoughts away and went back to her work. She had pipes to fix and systems to maintain. The station needed her skills, and she was not about to let everyone down just because some ancient alien had shown up. But late that night, when her shift finally ended, Jiwoo found herself walking past one of the observation screens. It showed a live feed from the quarantine bay. She stopped and stared. Krevthor stood in the exact center of his cell, perfectly still. He had not moved in hours. His glowing red eyes stared straight ahead at nothing. He looked like a statue frozen in time. Jiwoo watched him for a long moment. Then she shook her head and walked away. She had no idea that in a few weeks everything would change. She had no idea that she would be the one to change it. 3 days passed since Krevthor arrived at Helios 9. The station slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though tension still hung in the air like smoke. People went about their daily tasks, but conversations always turned back to the warrior locked in Quarantine Bay 7. Ji-woo found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. During her breaks, she would sometimes pull up the observation feed on her datapad. She told herself it was just curiosity. Nothing more. What she saw confused her. Krevthor barely moved. He stood in the same spot for hours, sometimes for entire days. His red eyes never closed. He did not eat the food that drones delivered. He did not sleep on the platform provided. He just stood there like he was waiting for something. "What are you waiting for?" Ji-woo whispered to the screen during one of her breaks. Sungmin caught her watching once. "Still not scared?" he asked with a grin. Ji-woo quickly closed the feed. "I'm not scared. I don't know. It seems sad, I guess." "Sad?" "Ji-woo, that thing down there killed millions of people back in the old days." "Maybe. Maybe not. He's just one person. How do we know what he did?" Ji-woo stood up and stretched. "Anyway, I need to check the ventilation system near Sector 12. The air recyclers are acting up again. Sector 12 was close to the quarantine area. Very close. Ji-woo had to get special permission to work there, and she had to carry a security badge that would alert the guards if she got too near the restricted zone. The ventilation shaft was old and cramped. Ji-woo crawled through it with her tools, following the sound of the malfunctioning recycler. The metal around her creaked and groaned. This part of the station needed serious repairs, but the budget never seemed to cover it. She found the problem quickly. A fan blade had cracked and was scraping against the housing. Easy fix. She pulled out her welding torch and got to work. That was when the power surge happened. Later, the engineers would say it was a fault in the main grid. Energy had built up in one of the old capacitors and released all at once. But in that moment, all Ji-woo knew was that the world exploded in light and heat. The blast threw her backward through the ventilation shaft. Her body slammed against metal. Her head rang like a bell. Sparks showered everywhere. The smell of burning plastic filled her nose. When the world stopped spinning, Ji-woo realized she was stuck. A piece of the shaft had collapsed on her leg, pinning her in place. She tried to pull free, but pain shot up from her ankle. Something was definitely broken. "Help," she called out. Her voice sounded weak. "Can anyone hear me?" Alarms started blaring. Emergency lights flashed red. Ji-woo could hear shouting in the distance. People were coming. She just had to wait. Then she looked to her left and her heart stopped. The blast had torn a hole in the wall. Through the gap, she could see directly into Quarantine Bay 7. She could see Krevthor standing just 30 feet away. The energy barriers were still working, but the wall between them was damaged. If the barriers failed, there would be nothing between them. Krevthor turned his head. His glowing red eyes locked onto hers. Ji-woo froze. Every story she had ever heard about the Velkari ran through her mind. The massacres, the destroyed worlds, the rivers of blood. This was a creature bred for war. A warrior who had killed for thousands of years before being locked away, and she was trapped, helpless. If he wanted to hurt her, she could not stop him. Krevthor took a step toward the damaged wall. Ji-woo's breath caught in her throat. Another step. He was getting closer. The red glow of his eyes seemed to get brighter. "Stay back," Ji-woo said, though her voice shook. "Please, just stay back." He stopped. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Ji-woo could not read his expression behind the armor and helmet. She did not know what he was thinking. She did not know what he would do. Then Krevthor did something that surprised her completely. He took 3 steps backward, away from the damaged wall. He moved to the far corner of his cell, as far from her as he could get. And there he stood, perfectly still, watching but not approaching. "Security team, move in," someone shouted from down the corridor. "We have a breach near the quarantine zone." Footsteps pounded closer. Ji-woo could hear equipment being dragged, orders being shouted. But she could not take her eyes off Krevthor. He had not attacked. He had not tried to escape. He had moved away, giving the rescue team room to work. Why? The security team arrived in force. 20 armed guards surrounded the area, while 2 medical technicians carefully removed the debris from Ji-woo's leg. She bit back a scream as they freed her. The pain was intense, but she stayed focused on the warrior in his cell. He had not moved. His eyes followed the rescue team. but he made no threatening gestures. He just watched, silent and still. "Can you walk?" asked one of the medics, a Balorian named Haiwan. "I don't think so," Ji-woo said through gritted teeth. "My ankle is definitely broken. They brought a stretcher." As they lifted Ji-woo onto it, she kept her eyes on Krevthor. Just before they carried her around the corner, she saw something strange. His head tilted slightly, like he was concerned, like he was making sure she was okay, or maybe she was imagining it. The pain was making her dizzy. The medical bay was busy. Haiwan set Ji-woo's ankle and wrapped it in a healing cast. The technology would repair the bone in a few days, but until then, she would be on light duty. "You were lucky," Haiwan said as she worked. "If that debris had hit you a few inches higher, it could have crushed your spine." "Yeah, lucky," Ji-woo said, staring at the ceiling, but she was not thinking about the debris. She was thinking about Red Eyes and a warrior who had chosen not to attack, who had stepped back, who had given her space. Commander Tae-yang visited her that evening. He looked tired and worried. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a cargo shuttle," Ji-woo said with a weak smile. "But I'll live." "How bad is the damage?" "We're sealing the wall now. The barriers held, thankfully. If they had failed..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. He didn't try to escape, Ji-woo said quietly. Tae-yang nodded. "I saw the security footage." "I'll admit that surprised me. Every report from the old days said the Velkari would take any opportunity to fight or flee. But he just stood there. He moved back. Away from me. Why would he do that? I don't know. Maybe he knew he couldn't get through the barriers. Maybe he was just planning his next move." Tae-yang rubbed his eyes. "Or maybe he's not what we expected. Either way, I'm doubling the guard rotation. We can't take chances." After the commander left, Ji-woo lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. Sleep would not come. Her mind kept returning to that moment when she had locked eyes with Krevthor. She had seen something there. Something that did not match the stories. She had seen patience, restraint, maybe even concern. No, that was crazy. He was a Velkari warrior. He was not capable of concern. Everyone knew that, but then why had he moved away? Why had he given the rescue team space? Why had he not tried to escape when he had the chance? Ji-woo reached for her datapad. Her fingers hesitated over the screen. Then, feeling slightly foolish, she opened the observation feed for Quarantine Bay 7. Krevthor stood in the center of his cell, exactly where he always stood. But something was different. His head was slightly bowed, like he was deep in thought. Or maybe deep in memory. Ji-woo watched him for a long time. She did not know why. She just felt like she needed to understand. Who was he really? What was he thinking? Was he as dangerous as everyone believed? "What's your story?" she whispered to the screen. "Who are you really?" The warrior did not answer, of course. He just stood there in his cell, alone with whatever thoughts occupied a 3,000-year-old mind. Ji-woo finally fell asleep with the data pad still in her hand, the feed still running. In her dreams, she saw Red Eyes watching her, but they were not angry or cruel. They were just sad, incredibly, impossibly sad. When she woke the next morning, she had made a decision. She did not fully understand it yet. She could not explain it to herself. But she knew one thing for certain. She needed to know more about Krevthor. And somehow, someway, she was going to find out who he really was. Ji-woo spent 5 days in the medical bay. Her ankle healed quickly thanks to the advanced technology. But the doctors wanted to keep her under observation. She did not mind. It gave her time to think, time to plan. She spent hours watching the observation feed. Krevthor never changed his routine. He stood motionless for most of the day. Sometimes his hands would move, tracing patterns in the air. The patterns glowed faintly, like he was drawing with light itself, ancient symbols that meant nothing to anyone alive today. Other times she saw his shoulders sag, just for a moment, like he was tired. Not physically tired, but tired deep in his soul. Then he would straighten again and return to his perfect stillness. Nobody else seemed to notice these small details. The security guards watched him on their screens, but they were looking for threats. They were not looking for a person. Ji-woo was. On the 6th day, the doctors cleared her for light duty. She was given a walking brace and strict orders not to do any heavy work. That was fine. She had other plans. Sungmin found her in the tool storage room gathering equipment. "What are you doing?" he asked suspiciously. "My job," Jiwoo said, loading tools into her work bag. The sensor array in Corridor 42 needs calibration. Corridor 42 is right next to the quarantine zone. I know where it is. Sungmin grabbed her arm. Jiwoo, this is crazy. You almost got killed last week. Why would you go back there? Jiwoo pulled her arm free gently. Because somebody needs to fix those sensors, and I'm the best technician we have for that system. You know that. Let someone else do it. Who? You? You hate working with sensor arrays. Jiwoo smiled at her friend. Don't worry so much. I'll be careful. I promise. But being careful was not really what she had in mind. The sensor calibration took 2 hours. Jiwoo worked slowly, making sure everything was perfect. When she finished, she stood in the corridor and looked down toward the quarantine zone. Security barriers blocked the way. Guards stood at their posts. Warning signs covered every wall. She could still turn back. She could go to her quarters and forget about the strange warrior. That would be the smart thing. The safe thing. Instead, Jiwoo walked toward the barriers. Stop right there, said one of the guards, a human named Kyung-soo. This area is restricted, I know. I'm not trying to get through. Jiwoo hesitated. How could she explain something she did not fully understand herself? I just want to sit here for a while. Is that allowed? Kyung-soo frowned. Why would you want to do that? Does it matter? I'm not breaking any rules if I sit in a public corridor, am I? The guard looked uncertain. He checked with his supervisor over the radio. After a brief conversation, he shrugged. Okay, I guess. But you stay on that side of the barrier. Don't touch anything. And if we tell you to leave, you leave. Understood? Understood. Jiwoo found a spot against the wall where she had a clear view through the barriers and into the quarantine bay. She sat down carefully, favoring her healing ankle. From here, she could see Krevthor clearly. He stood in his usual spot, motionless. But after a few minutes, his head turned. Those red eyes focused on her. They stared at each other across the distance. Jiwoo's heart beat faster, but she did not look away. She had come here for a reason, even if she could not fully explain what that reason was. Hello? She said quietly. She did not expect him to hear her through the barriers. She did not expect him to respond. She just felt like she needed to say something. Krevthor's head tilted slightly. A gesture of curiosity, maybe. Or confusion. Jiwoo took a breath. I'm Jiwoo. I'm the one who got trapped last week. I don't know if you remember. Probably not. You see lots of people through that glass, I bet. No response. Of course not. I wanted to thank you, Jiwoo continued, for moving back. For not trying to escape. You could have, probably. Those barriers are strong, but you're stronger, aren't you? Everyone says your people could tear apart starships with their bare hands. Still nothing. Jiwoo felt foolish talking to someone who would not answer. But now that she had started, she found she could not stop. Words poured out of her. The doctors say I should stay away from this sector. My friends think I'm crazy for coming here. Maybe I am. But I keep thinking about that moment when we looked at each other. You were so still, so careful. That doesn't match what everyone says about your people. She leaned her head back against the wall. I've been on this station for 2 years. I fix things. Pipes, sensors, life support systems. Sometimes I feel like this whole place would fall apart without me. Not because I'm special, but because everything is so old and broken and nobody else wants to deal with it. Krevthor remained motionless, but Jiwoo noticed his eyes had not left her. He was listening. Actually listening. Earth is pretty far from here, she said. I miss it sometimes. I miss real rain. I miss open sky. Stations are nice, but everything is metal and recycled air. Do you ever miss your home? Or is it too painful to think about? The silence stretched between them. Jiwoo sat there for over an hour, talking about nothing important. Her day, her frustrations with the station's old equipment. A funny thing Sungmin had said last week. She talked like she was talking to a friend, not an ancient warrior who might be planning how to kill everyone on the station. Eventually, her shift break ended. She had to get back to work. I should go, Jiwoo said, standing up carefully. But I think I'll come back tomorrow. If that's okay. You don't have to talk or anything. I feel like maybe you could use some company. Even if you don't want it. She walked away without looking back. Behind her, Krevthor watched her go. And for the first time in 3,000 years, something stirred in his ancient heart. Something he thought had died long ago. Interest. Jiwoo returned the next night. And the night after that, she would finish her shift, grab something to eat, and then make her way to the corridor outside the quarantine zone. Kyung-soo and the other guards got used to seeing her. They thought she was strange but harmless. Each night Ji-woo talked about her life, her work, her thoughts. She talked about Earth and human culture. She told stories about her childhood, her family, the reasons she had joined the station crew. She asked questions she knew he would not answer. What was his homeworld like? Did he have family? What did he dream about during those 3,000 years of sleep? Krevthor never spoke. He never moved from his spot, but he always turned to face her when she arrived. His eyes followed her movements, and Ji-woo began to notice small things, the way his posture relaxed slightly when she spoke, the way his head would tilt when she asked a question, like he was considering how to answer even though he never did. The station personnel noticed her routine. Rumors started spreading. Some people thought she was brave. Others thought she was insane. A few suggested she might be under some kind of alien mind control. Commander Tae-yang called her to his office on the 10th night. "Technician Ji-woo," he said seriously, "I've been hearing reports about your activities near the quarantine zone." Ji-woo stood at attention. "I haven't broken any protocols, sir. I stay on the correct side of the barriers. I don't touch anything." "The guards can confirm that. That's not what I'm concerned about. I want to know why you're doing this." "Doing what, sir?" "Talking to that creature. Sitting outside his cell like you're visiting a friend." Ji-woo thought carefully about her answer. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. He's been here for almost 2 weeks. In that entire time, he hasn't done anything aggressive. He hasn't tried to escape. He just stands there. Don't you think that's strange? If he was really the monster everyone says, wouldn't he have done something by now?" Tae-yang leaned back in his chair. "Maybe he's just waiting for the right moment. Or maybe he's just alone. Maybe he's tired. Maybe after 3,000 years of being hated and feared, he doesn't see the point in fighting anymore." Ji-woo met the commander's eyes. "I can't explain it, sir. I just feel like someone should treat him like a person, not a threat. Even if I'm wrong. Even if he is dangerous. Doesn't he deserve at least that much?" The commander was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. Can I keep visiting him? I can't stop you. You're not breaking any rules. But Ji-woo, if anything happens, if he shows any sign of aggression, I need you to promise me you'll run. Don't try to be a hero. I promise, sir." That night, Ji-woo returned to her usual spot. She sat down and smiled at the watching warrior. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I had to talk to the boss. He thinks I'm crazy, by the way. Just thought you should know. Most people on this station think I've lost my mind for talking to you." She pulled out a data pad and scrolled through some files. "I was reading about your people today, the Valkyrie. There's not much information that isn't about the wars, but I found something interesting. Did you know your species was known for poetry before the war started? Real beautiful poetry about stars and time and memory. I wonder if you know any of those poems. I wonder if you remember what your people were like before everything went wrong." Ji-woo looked up at Krevthor. He stood as still as ever, but his eyes seemed brighter somehow. More focused. "Maybe one day you'll tell me," she said softly. "Maybe one day you'll trust me enough to talk. I can wait. I'm patient." She did not know it then, but she would not have to wait much longer. 3 weeks. 21 days. Ji-woo had visited Krevthor every single night. She talked about everything and nothing. The weather systems on Earth, her favorite foods. The difficulties of maintaining a space station with equipment that was decades old. She told him jokes that he never laughed at. She asked questions he never answered, but something was changing. Ji-woo could feel it in the air between them. The way Krevthor watched her was different now. More focused, more present. Like he was really seeing her, not just observing a potential threat. Tonight felt different from the moment she arrived. Ji-woo could not explain why. The corridor looked the same. The guards were at their usual posts. The barriers hummed with their normal energy. But something had shifted. She sat in her usual spot and pulled out her thermos. Real coffee was expensive on the station, but she had saved up for a small bag. The smell alone was worth it. "I splurged today," she said, taking a sip. "Real coffee from Earth, not that synthetic stuff they usually serve in the cafeteria. It costs almost a week's salary for this little bit. But sometimes you need to treat yourself, you know?" Krevthor stood in the center of his cell. His red eyes watched her with that now familiar intensity. Ji-woo smiled. "You're probably wondering why I keep coming here. Honestly, I've been wondering that myself. My friend Sung Min says I have a habit of befriending broken things. I think he meant it as an insult, but I don't see it that way. She took another sip of coffee. When I was little, I found a bird with a broken wing. Everyone said to leave it alone, that it would die anyway. But I brought it home and took care of it. Fed it by hand, kept it safe. After a few weeks, the wing healed and it flew away. I never saw it again, but I didn't need to. I just needed to know I had helped. Jiwoo looked directly at Krevthor. I know you're not a bird with a broken wing. You're a warrior who has lived for thousands of years. You've probably seen things I couldn't even imagine. But you look tired, like you're carrying something too heavy. And I thought maybe, just maybe, having someone to talk to might help. Even if you never talk back. The silence stretched between them. Jiwoo had grown used to the quiet. She did not expect responses anymore. The talking was for her as much as for him. Then Krevthor moved, not just a slight shift or a tilt of his head. He took 3 full steps forward, closer to the barrier than he had ever come. His massive form seemed to fill the entire cell. Jiwoo's heart jumped, but she did not move. She did not run. She just watched as he approached the energy field that separated them. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone, deep and rough from thousands of years of silence. The words came slowly, carefully, in perfect standard language that everyone in the galaxy could understand. You are not afraid. Jiwoo nearly dropped her coffee. Her eyes went wide. For a moment, she could not breathe. He had spoken. After 3 weeks of silence, he had finally spoken. She started, then stopped. Her mind was racing. Should I be? Krevthor tilted his head slightly. All others are. Your species is young. You do not remember the wars of extinction. You do not carry the hatred. Humans weren't part of the galaxy back then, Jiwoo said carefully. We were still figuring out fire and wheels when you were conquering stars. So no, I don't carry that hatred. I only know what I've read in history files. Then you know what my people did. What I did? I know what the history files say your people did. I don't know what you did specifically. There's a difference. Krevthor was silent for a long moment. His glowing eyes never left her face. Why do you come here? Why do you speak to me as if I were your equal? Jiwoo set down her coffee carefully. Because you are my equal. Maybe not in strength or age or experience, but as a person, yeah, you're equal. I am not a person. I am a weapon. That is all I have ever been. I don't believe that. You should. Krevthor's voice carried weight that made the air feel heavy. I was born into war. I was raised for war. I knew nothing else. My hands have ended more lives than stars in your sky. I am exactly what the history files say I am. Then why didn't you try to escape when the wall was damaged? Jiwoo asked. Why did you move back? Why have you been standing in that cell peacefully for 3 weeks without causing any trouble? Krevthor turned away from her. His shoulders rose and fell once like a sigh. Because there is no point. The galaxy I knew is gone. My people are gone. Everything I fought for, everything I believed in, all of it turned to dust 3,000 years ago. What happened to your people? We destroyed ourselves. The words were bitter. The wars we started eventually consumed us. The galaxy united against us. We were so certain of our superiority, so sure that nothing could stop us. We were wrong. In the end, we fell just like everyone else. Jiwoo stood up slowly, using the wall for support. Her ankle was almost fully healed, but she still moved carefully. Were you part of it? The conquest? Yes, for many centuries I fought in the wars. I followed orders. I believed what my commanders told me, that we were bringing order to chaos, that our rule was necessary. Krevthor's hands clenched into fists. I was a fool. You changed your mind? Eventually. Too late to matter. I joined a faction that opposed the endless fighting. We believed the wars had gone too far, that we needed to find peace. But the leadership saw us as traitors. When our people began to fall, when the end came, they placed me in suspended animation, not to preserve me, to punish me. Jiwoo moved closer to the barrier, not close enough to touch it, but closer than she had ever been. They wanted you to live forever while everything you knew died? They wanted me to be the last, to carry the weight of our species' crimes alone, to be a living reminder of what the Valkyrie had become. Krevthor turned back to face her. They succeeded. I am the last, and I will carry this burden until the end of time. That's not fair, Jiwoo said quietly. You're not responsible for what others did. I am responsible for what I did. I followed orders when I should have questioned them. I fought in battles that should never have been fought. I cannot undo those actions. I cannot bring back the dead. No one can change the past, but you can choose what you do now. Krevthor looked at her for a long time. What would you have me do? I am a relic from a darker age. The galaxy fears me, and they are right to fear me. I am capable of terrible things. Being capable of terrible things doesn't mean you have to do terrible things, Jiwoo said. Every person is capable of violence. Humans, too. We've had our own wars, our own atrocities, but we try to be better. We fail a lot, but we keep trying. Your species is young and hopeful. I am old and tired. Then rest. Not in punishment. Not in isolation, just rest. You've been fighting for thousands of years, both in war and against yourself. Maybe it's time to stop fighting. Krevthor's eyes dimmed slightly, like the fire behind them was fading. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I have not spoken to anyone in 3,000 years. Not truly. The scientists who woke me were terrified. They ran before I could explain that I meant no harm. And then I was brought here to this cell, surrounded by guards who would destroy me if I moved wrong. I'm not terrified of you, Jiwoo said. You should be. But I'm not. Want to know why? Jiwoo smiled slightly. Because I've been watching you for 3 weeks. I've seen how careful you are, how still you stand, how you moved away when I was trapped. A monster wouldn't do that. A weapon wouldn't care. Perhaps I am simply waiting for the right moment to strike. Are you? No. Then what are you waiting for? Krevthor was silent. The red glow of his eyes flickered. I do not know anymore. For 3,000 years I waited in darkness, alone with my thoughts and my guilt. When I woke, I found a galaxy that had moved on without me, a galaxy that still hates what I represent. I thought perhaps it would be better to simply exist quietly until time finally claims me. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Jiwoo said. It is reality. It doesn't have to be. Jiwoo took a deep breath. I can't promise that everyone will forgive you or forget what your people did, but I can promise that you don't have to face it alone. I'll come back tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that. For as long as you're here, why would you do this? Because everyone deserves at least one friend, even ancient warriors from extinct species. Jiwoo picked up her coffee thermos. I have to go. My shift starts early tomorrow. But I'll be back. I promise. She started to walk away, then paused and looked back. By the way, my name is Jiwoo. I know I mentioned it before, but we were never properly introduced. Krevthor stood perfectly still for a moment. Then slowly he placed his right fist over his chest, an ancient gesture of respect among his people. I am Krevthor, and I thank you for seeing me as more than a monster. Jiwoo smiled. That's what friends do. As she walked away, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Behind her in his cell, Krevthor watched her go, and for the first time in 3,000 years he felt something he thought had died long ago. Hope. Word spread through Helios 9 like wildfire. The Valkyrie warrior had spoken. More importantly, he had spoken to Jiwoo, the young human mechanic who had been visiting him for weeks. People had different reactions. Some were excited about the possibility of finally communicating with the ancient warrior. Others were more afraid than ever. If Krevthor was intelligent enough to speak, that made him more dangerous, not less. A thinking, planning enemy was worse than a mindless beast. Commander Taeyang called an emergency council meeting. Representatives from all the major species on the station gathered in the conference room. The atmosphere was tense. This changes things, said a Threxian counselor named Calvin. His blue skin was darker than usual, a sign of agitation in his species. We cannot keep an intelligent being locked in a cell indefinitely without formal charges or diplomatic process. We also cannot simply release him, countered a Balorian representative. The security risk is too great. Hyunwoo, the human diplomat on the council, leaned forward. Perhaps we're approaching this wrong. He's been here for nearly a month without incident. He's had opportunities to escape and hasn't taken them. Maybe instead of treating him as a prisoner, we should treat him as a refugee. A refugee? Calvin's voice was sharp with anger. My people lost 17 billion lives to his species. 17 billion? And you want to grant him refugee status? I want to find a solution that doesn't involve keeping him locked in a box forever, Hyunwoo said calmly. The wars were 3,000 years ago. Everyone who fought in them is dead except him. At what point do we allow the past to be the past? Taeyang rubbed his temples. He had been getting headaches more often lately. We need more information. We need to understand what he wants, what his intentions are, and apparently the only person he'll talk to is Technician Jiwoo. Then bring her to the council, suggested another member. Let's hear what she has to say. Jiwoo was in the middle of replacing a faulty power coupling when the summons came. She arrived at the conference room still wearing her work coveralls, oil stains on her hands. The council chamber was impressive. A circular table with holographic displays, high ceilings, representatives from a dozen species all staring at her. Jiwoo suddenly felt very small and very young. Technician Jiwoo, Taeyang said formally, "Thank you for coming. We have some questions about your interactions with the prisoner." Krevthor, Jiwoo corrected quietly. His name is Krevthor. Calvin's eyes narrowed. "You've become quite familiar with it, haven't you?" "With him," Jiwoo said firmly. "He's a person, not an it. He's a Velkari, a species that committed genocide against my people. He was also punished by his own people for opposing the wars. He was put in stasis as a punishment, not an honor. He's a victim too." The room erupted in arguments. Some council members agreed with Jiwoo. Others thought she was naive or worse, compromised. The shouting grew louder. "Enough!" Taeyang's voice cut through the noise. "We need solutions, not arguments. Jiwoo, based on your conversations with Krevthor, what do you think he wants?" Jiwoo thought carefully about her answer. "I think he wants to be left alone. I think he's tired. He's been fighting either in war or against himself for thousands of years. He didn't ask to be woken up. He didn't ask to be here. He's just existing, waiting. Waiting for what?" Hyunwoo asked gently. "Maybe for forgiveness. Maybe for the courage to hope again. I don't know. But I know he's not a threat. Not unless we make him one." Calvin stood abruptly. "You're asking us to trust a creature that could destroy this entire station with his bare hands." "I'm asking you to see him as a person," Jiwoo said. "Look, I understand you're afraid. I get it, but fear makes us do stupid things. We can either keep him locked up forever and prove that the galaxy hasn't learned anything in 3,000 years, or we can try something different." "Like what?" Taeyang asked. Jiwoo took a deep breath. "Let him out. Under supervision. Let him walk around, see the station, interact with people. Let him prove he's not the monster everyone thinks he is." The room exploded again. Half the council thought it was the most ridiculous idea they had ever heard. The other half was actually considering it. "Absolutely not," Calvin said. "I will not allow that creature to roam free among innocent people. He wouldn't be free. He'd be supervised, guarded, and I'd stay with him the whole time." Jiwoo surprised herself with the words. "I'd be responsible for him. You?" Calvin laughed bitterly. "A mechanic? You'd be responsible for the last Velkari warrior? I'm the only one he trusts. I'm the only one he talks to. So yes, me." The council debated for 3 hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Security concerns were raised and addressed. Compromises were suggested and rejected. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, they reached a decision. Krevthor would be allowed limited access to a secured section of the station. The section would be cleared of all non-essential personnel. 20 armed guards would maintain a perimeter, and Jiwoo would accompany him at all times as his cultural liaison and handler. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Jiwoo went to the quarantine bay that evening. The guards had been informed of the council's decision. They looked at her with a mixture of respect and pity, like she had just volunteered to walk into a fire. Krevthor stood in his usual spot. But when Jiwoo arrived, he moved closer to the barrier. "You spoke to the council," he said. "It was not a question. They have cameras everywhere. You probably saw the whole thing. I did. You defended me. Of course I did. You're my friend." Jiwoo smiled. "And I have good news. They're going to let you out. Not completely free, but out of this cell at least. You'll be able to walk around a bit, see the station." Krevthor was silent for a long moment. Why would they agree to this? "Because I convinced them you weren't a threat. Because Hyunwoo backed me up. And because keeping you locked in here forever isn't fair to anyone." Jiwoo paused. "But there's a condition. I have to stay with you. I'm your handler, technically. If you do anything threatening, it's on me. You would take responsibility for my actions." "Yes, that is foolish. You barely know me. I could betray your trust in an instant." "You could," Jiwoo agreed. "But you won't. I know you won't." "How can you be so certain?" Because you've had 3 weeks to hurt someone and you haven't. Because you moved away when I was trapped. Because you stood in this cell peacefully even though you could probably break through that barrier if you really wanted to. Because you're not the monster everyone thinks you are. Krevthor placed his hand against the barrier. The energy field crackled around his fingers, but he did not pull away. Your faith in me is either the greatest gift I have ever received, or the most dangerous mistake you will ever make. Jiwoo placed her hand on her side of the barrier, matching his gesture. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. The next morning came too quickly. Jiwoo barely slept. She kept thinking about what could go wrong. What if she was wrong about Krevthor? What if he really was dangerous? What if someone got hurt because of her decision? But when she arrived at the quarantine bay, surrounded by nervous guards and security personnel, she pushed those thoughts away. She had made her choice. She would stand by it. The barrier deactivated with a hiss of released energy. For the first time in a month, Krevthor was free to move beyond his cell. He stepped out slowly, almost cautiously. The guards raised their weapons but held their fire. Krevthor looked around the corridor, taking in details he had only seen through barriers before. Then he looked at Jiwoo. She smiled and tried to sound more confident than she felt. Ready for a walk? Krevthor studied her face for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt. Not in submission, but to bring himself closer to her height. Lead the way, small friend. I will follow. They walked through the secured corridors together, the ancient warrior and the young mechanic. Guards maintained their distance, weapons ready but not aimed. Cameras tracked their every movement. The entire station watched through screens and feeds, holding their breath, and nothing terrible happened. Krevthor walked with careful, measured steps. He looked at everything with quiet interest. The walls, the lights, the windows showing the stars beyond. Jiwoo pointed out different features, explaining how the station worked, what different sections were for. When they reached an observation deck, Krevthor stopped. The view was spectacular, stars stretching endlessly in all directions. Beautiful, he said softly. Yeah, Jiwoo agreed. It never gets old. I had forgotten. Krevthor's voice was barely above a whisper. In my time, I only saw stars from warships. They were just navigation points, strategic positions. I had forgotten they could simply be beautiful. Jiwoo stood beside him, looking out at the same view. Then I'm glad you're remembering. They stood there together for a long time, the warrior and his small friend, watching stars that had witnessed both the worst and best of what the galaxy could offer. For 5 days, the arrangement worked. Krevthor was allowed 2 hours each day outside his cell, always accompanied by Jiwoo and always under heavy guard. He walked the secured corridors, sat at observation windows, and occasionally spoke with Jiwoo about the station or the stars. The guards began to relax just slightly. The warrior had shown no aggression, made no threatening moves. He was quiet and careful, almost painfully so. Some of them started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Jiwoo had been right about him, but not everyone was convinced. On the 6th day, Jiwoo brought Krevthor to a new section, a small garden area where the station grew fresh vegetables and flowers. It was still secured, still monitored, but it was a change from the metal corridors. Krevthor stopped at the entrance to the garden. His red eyes widened slightly. Life, he said. Growing things. I have not seen this in... I cannot remember how long, Jiwoo smiled. It's not much, but the botanist crew works hard to keep it healthy. Real plants are good for morale. Plus, the vegetables taste better than synthetic food. They walked between the rows of growing plants. Krevthor moved carefully, making sure his large frame did not damage anything. He paused at a flowering plant, a species from Earth with bright yellow petals. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the flower. Sure, just be gentle. Krevthor reached out with one massive hand. His fingers, which could crush steel, touched the petals with incredible delicacy. Fragile, he said. So easily destroyed. Yet it grows anyway, despite its vulnerability. There is courage in that. Jiwoo was about to respond when alarms began blaring. Not the emergency klaxons, but the general announcement system. Someone was making a station-wide broadcast. Attention all personnel. A voice boomed through the speakers. It was Calvin, the Threxian counselor. Please report to main concourse immediately. There is a matter of station security that requires public discussion. Jiwoo and Krevthor exchanged glances. This was not normal protocol. We should go see what this is about, Jiwoo said nervously. The main concourse was the largest open area on the station, a huge circular space where people gathered for meetings and social events. When Jiwoo and Krevthor arrived with their escort of guards, they found hundreds of people already assembled. Representatives from every species on the station. Workers, families, everyone. And standing in the center, on a raised platform, was Calvin. The Threxian counselor was an imposing figure, tall even for his species, with military bearing and scars that spoke of a violent past. His eyes locked onto Krevthor the moment they entered. There, Calvin pointed. There is the creature we have allowed to walk among us. The last of the Velkari, the remnant of a species that destroyed worlds. The crowd stirred uneasily. People moved away from Krevthor, creating a clear space around him. The guards raised their weapons slightly. Jiwoo stepped forward. Counselor Calvin, what are you doing? This was approved by the council. You agreed to the conditions. I agreed to nothing, Calvin said coldly. I was outvoted. But the people of this station deserve to know what they're living with. They deserve to see the truth. He pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the concourse. Ancient images, battlefields, destroyed cities, bodies, so many bodies. This is what the Velkari did. Calvin's voice echoed through the space. This is what they were. Conquerors, murderers, world killers. They showed no mercy to my people. They burned our colonies, killed our children, left nothing but ash and grief. The images continued, each one more terrible than the last. Jiwoo felt sick. She had read about the wars, but seeing the actual evidence was different. The scale of destruction was beyond comprehension. My grandfather's grandfather fought against them, Calvin continued. My family has passed down the stories for generations. The Velkari were not soldiers. They were demons in armor. They enjoyed the killing. They celebrated it. He turned to face Krevthor directly. And you, warrior, you stand there in your ancient armor and we are supposed to believe you are different? That you are safe? That we should simply forget what your people did? The crowd murmured agreement. Fear and anger spread through them like wildfire. Jiwoo could feel the mood turning dangerous. Krevthor stood perfectly still. His eyes reflected the holographic images of death and destruction. Jiwoo could not read his expression behind the helmet, but she saw his hands clench into fists. Counselor, Jiwoo said, trying to keep her voice steady. This isn't fair. Krevthor opposed the wars. He was punished by his own people for it. Convenient, Calvin spat. How do we know this is true? Because he says so? The Velkari were known for their deception as well as their violence. He's done nothing wrong since arriving here. Nothing. Yet. He's done nothing wrong yet. But what happens when he decides he's tired of being watched? What happens when the old instincts return? Calvin addressed the crowd again. This creature is a loaded weapon, and this foolish human girl wants us to believe it's safe. Jiwoo felt her face burn with anger. I'm not foolish. I've spent more time with him than anyone. I've talked to him, learned from him. He's not a monster. You're naive, Calvin said. You're young and you want to believe everyone can be redeemed. But some crimes are too great. Some species are too dangerous. The Velkari proved that. Krevthor finally moved. He took one step forward. The crowd gasped and pressed backward. Guards raised their weapons fully, targeting lights dancing across his armor. Stop, Jiwoo said urgently. Krevthor, don't. But the warrior did not stop. He walked forward slowly, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water. Parents pulled their children back. People reached for makeshift weapons. Krevthor walked until he stood directly in front of Calvin. The Threxian held his ground, but Jiwoo could see the fear in his eyes. Everyone held their breath. Then Krevthor did something nobody expected. He knelt, not just a slight lowering. He went down on both knees and bowed his head, a gesture of complete submission among the Velkari, an admission of defeat, an acceptance of judgment. You are right, Krevthor said, his voice carrying through the silent concourse. Your ancestors' blood is on my people's hands. I cannot deny this. I cannot undo it. The Velkari committed terrible crimes, and I was part of that machine of destruction. The holographic images still floated in the air around them. Death and fire and loss. I fought in the wars, Krevthor continued. I followed orders. I believed what my commanders told me, that we were bringing order to chaos. I was wrong. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Too many had died. Too much had been destroyed. He raised his head slightly to look at Calvin. I cannot ask for forgiveness. I have no right. I can only offer myself to whatever judgment you deem appropriate. If you believe I should be executed for my crimes, I will not resist. If you believe I should remain imprisoned forever, I will accept that. I am tired of running from what I am, what I was. The concourse was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Calvin stared down at the kneeling warrior. His hand shook. 3,000 years of cultural memory, of passed down grief and anger, warred with the reality in front of him. This was the enemy. The destroyer. The killer of billions, but the enemy was kneeling. Defenseless, accepting responsibility. Get up, Calvin said, his voice rough. Krevthor did not move. I said, get up, Calvin's voice broke. Get up and fight me. Be the monster I know you are. Give me a reason to hate you properly. I cannot give you that reason, Krevthor said quietly. I am done fighting. I have been fighting for 3,000 years. I am tired. So very tired, tears ran down Calvin's face. His entire body trembled. You killed my people. You destroyed everything we built. How dare you kneel there and ask for peace? I do not ask for peace. I do not deserve it. I only acknowledge the truth. Your hatred is earned. Your anger is justified. I am guilty of crimes that can never be forgiven. Calvin raised his hand as if to strike. The crowd gasped. Guards tensed, but the blow never came. The Threxian's hand trembled in the air, then slowly lowered. I can't, he whispered. You're not fighting back. You're just kneeling there, taking responsibility. How am I supposed to hate you when you do that? Hate me anyway, Krevthor said. I understand. I accept it. Jiwoo stepped forward carefully. Counselor Calvin, can I say something? Calvin looked at her with exhausted eyes. What? My people have a saying. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We've done terrible things too in our history. Wars, genocides, things we're ashamed of. But we learned that holding on to hatred only creates more pain. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't fix what's broken. She moved to stand beside Krevthor. He can't change what his people did, but he's trying to be something different. He's trying to live with the weight of history without letting it destroy him. Isn't that worth something? It doesn't bring back my ancestors, Calvin said. No, nothing will. But killing him or imprisoning him forever won't bring them back either. It just creates more suffering. Calvin looked between Jiwoo and the kneeling warrior. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He extended his hand to Krevthor. Get up, he said, more gently this time. Krevthor looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he reached up and took it. Calvin pulled him to his feet. I don't forgive you, the Threxian said. I can't, the wounds. 2 weeks passed after the confrontation in the main concourse. The station slowly found a new normal. Krevthor was still kept under supervision, but the restrictions had loosened slightly. He could access more areas now, and the guard presence had been reduced to 10 instead of 20. People still stared when he walked past. Some still pulled their children away, but others nodded in greeting. A few even said hello. The ice was beginning to thaw, slowly but surely. Jiwoo spent most of her free time with Krevthor. They had fallen into an easy routine. She would finish her maintenance work, then meet him for walks through the station. They talked about everything. She told him about human culture, about Earth's history, about the music and art and food of her people. He told her about the Velkari before the wars, about their poetry and philosophy, about the civilization they had been before everything went wrong. She was teaching him to laugh. He was not very good at it yet, but sometimes when she made a particularly bad joke, his shoulders would shake slightly. Progress. It was a quiet evening when everything changed. Jiwoo was in her quarters reading a book on her datapad when the alarms started. Not the gentle announcement chimes. The real alarms. The emergency ones that meant serious danger. She grabbed her communicator. This is Technician Jiwoo. What's happening? All personnel to emergency stations. Commander Taeyang's voice crackled through every speaker. We have incoming hostile vessels. Repeat, incoming hostile vessels. This is not a drill. Jiwoo's blood ran cold. She pulled up the security feed on her pad. The station's external cameras showed 3 ships approaching fast. They were ugly patchwork vessels covered in weapons and armor plates. Pirate ships scaring raiders. The worst kind. They were known throughout this sector for their brutality. They did not just steal, they destroyed. They took captives and sold them on black markets. They killed anyone who resisted. And Helios 9's defenses were old, outdated. The station had never needed strong weapons because it was supposed to be in a safe sector, but nothing was truly safe in space. Jiwoo ran toward the command center. The corridors were chaos. People rushing to shelter, security teams mobilizing, parents carrying children to the safe rooms. The fear was thick enough to taste. She burst into the command center. Tae-yang stood at the main console, his face pale. Hyunwoo was beside him, coordinating evacuation procedures. "How long until they're in weapons range?" Tae-yang asked. 12 minutes, replied the tactical officer. "Our defense grid might hold them off for a while, but the weapons are 40 years old. If they focus fire on one section, they'll break through." "What about military response?" "Where's the nearest patrol?" 4 hours away. We sent the distress call, but they won't make it in time." Tae-yang slammed his fist on the console. "We have 10,000 people on this station. We don't have enough evacuation pods for everyone." "We're prioritizing families with children," Hyunwoo said, his voice strained. "But you're right, we can't get everyone off in time." Jiwoo looked at the tactical display. 3 pirate ships against 1 old station. It was not a fight they could win. "People were going to die unless— Where's Krevthor?" she asked suddenly. Tae-yang turned to her. "In his secured quarters." "Why? He's a warrior, maybe the best warrior in galactic history. If anyone can help us fight those raiders, it's him." "Are you insane?" the tactical officer said. "We're supposed to arm the monster while we're under attack?" "He's not a monster, and right now he's the only chance we have." Jiwoo looked at Tae-yang. "Sir, please. Let me talk to him." "Let me ask." Tae-yang stared at her for a long moment. The alarms continued to blare. On the screen, the pirate ships got closer. Finally, he nodded. "Go. But Jiwoo, if he refuses, get to a shelter immediately." "That's an order." Jiwoo ran through the corridors faster than she had ever run before. Her lungs burned. Her legs ached, but she did not stop. When she reached Krevthor's quarters, she found him standing at the window watching the approaching ships. His red eyes tracked their movements with professional precision. "Krevthor," Jiwoo gasped out of breath. "We need your help." "I know," he said quietly. "I have been watching. Those are predator vessels. They come to take what is not theirs. Can you fight them? Can you help us?" Krevthor turned to face her. "If I do this, there is no going back. They will see what I truly am, what I am capable of. The careful peace we have built, your trust, all of it may shatter when they see me as a warrior again. I don't care. Right now, people are going to die. Children are going to die. If you can stop that, then that's all that matters. I am a weapon, Jiwoo. When you point a weapon, you must accept what it does." Jiwoo grabbed his arm. "Then be our weapon. Just this once. Protect these people, please." Krevthor looked down at her small hand on his armored arm. Then he placed his own hand over hers. "If I fight for you, I will try to show restraint, but I cannot promise there will be no death. Pirates understand only strength. If I am gentle, more will die. I understand. Do what you have to do." Krevthor nodded once. "Then take me to your armory. I will need weapons." They ran together through the corridors. Security teams tried to stop them, but Jiwoo had Commander Tae-yang send authorization. The armory doors opened. Inside were weapons from a dozen different species. Energy rifles, plasma cannons, shock batons. Krevthor looked at them all and shook his head. "These are toys," he said. He moved to a sealed section at the back, marked with warning symbols. Open that." The armory master hesitated. "Those are confiscated weapons. Illegal military hardware. We're not supposed to use them." "Open it," Jiwoo said. "Now." The seal broke with a hiss. Inside were weapons that looked ancient and deadly. Krevthor reached in and pulled out 2 curved blades that hummed with energy. They were Velkari weapons confiscated from a museum raid years ago. "I remember these," Krevthor said softly. "The craftsmanship is inferior to what we made in my time, but they will serve." He activated them. The blades glowed red, matching his eyes. Then he picked up a heavy energy cannon that normally required a mount to use. He held it in one hand like it weighed nothing. The armory master stared. "That cannon weighs 300 pounds. "I know," Krevthor said simply. They made their way to the main docking bay where the pirates would breach. Security teams were already positioned there, looking terrified. When they saw Krevthor approaching in full battle stance, weapons active, several of them took involuntary steps backward. "Hold your positions," Tae Yang's voice came through their communicators. "The Valkyrie is on our side. Let him pass." Krevthor moved to the center of the bay. Ji-woo stayed behind the security barriers with the others. She wanted to be closer, but she knew she would only get in the way. 9 minutes to breach, Tactical reported. The wait was agonizing. Ji-woo watched Krevthor stand perfectly still in the center of the bay. He had entered some kind of meditative state, preparing himself for battle. This was what he was born for, what he had been created to do. She just hoped he would remember the person he was trying to become. Breach in 30 seconds. The entire bay held its breath. 25 seconds, 20, 15. The outer door exploded inward. Scaran pirates poured through, at least 40 of them. They were big, heavily armored, carrying weapons that could tear through walls. They saw the security forces and laughed. This would be easy. Then they saw Krevthor. The laughter died. One of the pirates, clearly the leader, stopped and stared. "What is that?" Krevthor's eyes blazed brighter. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire bay, deep and terrible. "I am the last Valkyrie. I am 3,000 years of war given form, and you have made a grave mistake coming here." The lead pirate recovered quickly. "Kill it! Kill everything!" The pirates opened fire. Energy blasts filled the bay with light and heat. But Krevthor was already moving. He moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. The energy cannon in his left hand fired in controlled bursts, each shot perfectly placed. 3 pirates went down. Their weapons destroyed, armor cracked. The curved blades in his right hand sang through the air, deflecting incoming fire, cutting through enemy weapons. A pirate tried to flank him. Krevthor spun faster than thought and slammed the cannon into the pirate's chest. The pirate flew backward and did not get up. "Spread out! Surround it!" The leader screamed. But surrounding Krevthor was like trying to surround a storm. He was everywhere at once. His movements were precise, economical, devastating. Every strike served a purpose. Disable the weapon. Crack the armor. Remove the threat. He was not being unnecessarily brutal. He was being efficient, and it was terrifying to watch. Ji-woo had read about Valkyrie warriors. She had seen the historical images. But seeing Krevthor fight in person was something else entirely. This was a master at work. 3,000 years of experience flowing through every movement. He knew where every enemy was without looking. He anticipated attacks before they happened. He controlled the entire battlefield like a conductor leading an orchestra. The pirates began to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They tried to retreat back to their ships, but Krevthor cut off their escape. Not to kill them, but to drive them into a corner where security forces could disable them with stun weapons. The fight lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, 38 pirates were unconscious or disabled. 2 had been killed, but only because they had tried to detonate explosives that 3 months had passed since the pirate attack. Helios 9 had changed in ways both small and large. The defense grid had been upgraded with new weapon systems. Security protocols had been improved. But the biggest change was not in the station's hardware. It was in its people. Krevthor was no longer confined to secured areas. After the battle, the council had held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to grant him provisional citizenship. He was free to move throughout the station, though he still technically had Ji-woo as his cultural liaison. Not that he needed supervision anymore. People had stopped being afraid. Well, most people anyway. Ji-woo found Krevthor in the observation deck, his favorite place on the station. He stood at the large window watching ships come and go from the docking bays. It was early morning by station time, and the area was mostly empty. "You're up early," she said, walking up beside him. "I do not sleep much," Krevthor replied. "Old habits? Warriors sleep lightly, always ready for danger. There's no danger here now. You made sure of that." Krevthor tilted his head slightly. "Word has spread as I intended. 3 more pirate crews have changed course away from this sector in the past month. They tell stories about the ancient warrior who protects Helios 9. Some of the stories are quite exaggerated." Ji-woo laughed. "I heard one where you single-handedly destroyed an entire fleet. Another one said you were 10 feet tall and breathed fire. Only 9 feet, Krevthor said with what might have been humor. And I do not breathe fire." That would be impractical. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. This had become their routine. Most mornings, Jiwoo would find Krevthor here, and they would talk before their days began. Sometimes about important things, sometimes about nothing at all. I have been thinking, Krevthor said eventually, about what comes next. What do you mean? I cannot stay here forever. This station has been kind to me, given me more than I deserved, but I am still the last of my kind. I do not truly belong anywhere. Jiwoo felt a sudden tightness in her chest. You belong here, with us. With me? Do I? Krevthor looked at her with his red eyes softer now than they had been months ago. I am grateful for everything you have done, Jiwoo. You gave me hope when I had none. You saw a person when everyone else saw a monster. But I cannot build a life on gratitude alone. Then what do you want? Really want? Krevthor was quiet for a long moment. I want to matter. Not as a weapon. Not as a relic from the past. But as someone who contributes something positive to the galaxy. I spent 3,000 years causing pain. I would like to spend whatever time I have left doing something better. You already do matter. You protected the station. You've helped with security training. You've taught the guards techniques that have made them better at their jobs. You're part of this community now, perhaps, but there are other stations, other places that need protection from pirates and raiders. I have skills that could help people across this entire sector. Jiwoo understood what he was saying. You want to leave. I want to find purpose, Krevthor corrected gently. There is a difference, but yes, I have been considering it. Commander Taeyang has offered to help me acquire a small ship. Nothing fancy, but enough to travel between stations. When were you planning to tell me? Now, I wanted your thoughts before I made any decisions. He turned to face her fully. You gave me a second chance at life, Jiwoo. I will not make any choice without considering what you think. Jiwoo felt tears threatening, but she pushed them back. I think you should do whatever makes you happy. You've spent enough time doing what others wanted. It's time you did something for yourself. And what about you? What about our friendship? Friendship doesn't end just because you're in a different place. We can still talk, still visit. The galaxy is big, but it's not that big. Jiwoo smiled, though it felt shaky. Besides, you'll probably need someone to help you fix your ship when something breaks. You're a warrior, not a mechanic. Krevthor's shoulders relaxed slightly. I was hoping you would say something like that. I do not want to lose your friendship, Jiwoo. It is one of the few truly good things I have ever had. You won't lose it. I promise. They stood together watching the stars. After a while, Krevthor spoke again. There is something else. Something I want to do before I leave. What? I want to record my story. The true story, not the legends or the propaganda. I want people to know what really happened during the wars. Why they started, how they ended, what it cost everyone, including my people. He paused. I want to make sure future generations learn from our mistakes, so they do not repeat them. Jiwoo nodded slowly. That's a good idea. A really good idea. The historical records are mostly from the perspective of the victims. Having your side of the story could help people understand what actually happened. Will you help me? You are better with words than I am. You could help me organize my thoughts, make sure I say what I mean to say. Of course I'll help. We can start whenever you're ready. Over the next 2 months, Jiwoo and Krevthor worked together on his historical account. They spent hours in the station's library, Krevthor speaking into recording devices while Jiwoo helped him structure his memories into something coherent. It was not easy. Some of the memories were painful. Battles he regretted. Orders he had followed without question. Friends he had lost. Krevthor sometimes had to stop and compose himself before continuing. But Jiwoo was always there, patient and supportive, helping him through the difficult parts. The account they created was remarkable. Not just a military history, but a personal one. Krevthor talked about his childhood, about Velkari culture before the wars corrupted it. He talked about the slow descent into madness that gripped his species, how fear and pride combined into something toxic. He talked about his own journey from loyal soldier to reluctant rebel. He did not shy away from his crimes. He listed them clearly, without excuses, but he also explained the context, the reasoning, the slow process by which good people convinced themselves that terrible things were necessary. When they finished, they had created something unprecedented. A primary source document from one of history's most feared warriors, offering insights that scholars had wanted for thousands of years. Commander Tai Yang reviewed the recording personally. "This is incredible," he said. "This could change how we understand that entire era of history." "Are you sure you want to release this publicly?" "I am sure," Krevthor said. "If my story can prevent even one war, then perhaps my existence has some value after all." The recording was uploaded to the Galactic Historical Archive. Within days, it had been downloaded millions of times. Scholars across the galaxy began studying it. Some praised Krevthor's honesty. Others criticized him for trying to justify the unjustifiable. But everyone agreed it was an important document. More importantly, people began to understand. The Velkari were not born monsters. They had become monsters slowly, through choices and circumstances and failures of wisdom. It was a warning about how any society could fall into darkness if they were not careful. The day came for Krevthor to leave. His ship was small but functional, equipped with basic weapons for defense and enough supplies for long journeys. The entire station gathered at the docking bay to see him off. Calvin approached first. "You're really leaving?" "I am, but I will return to visit. And if Helios 9 ever needs help, you only have to call. We'll hold you to that." Calvin extended his hand. "You've been good for this station, warrior. Better than any of us expected. Travel safe?" Others came forward. People Krevthor had trained. Families he had protected. Children who had learned that monsters could become heroes if given the chance. They all wanted to say goodbye. Finally, only Jiwoo was left. She walked with Krevthor to the boarding ramp of his ship. "So this is it," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "For now, I will be back in 6 months. I have already marked it on my calendar." Krevthor knelt down to her level one last time. "Thank you, Jiwoo, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. For being my first real friend in 3,000 years." Jiwoo hugged him. It was awkward, hugging someone in armor, but she did not care. "Thank you for letting me be your friend. For trusting me. For showing me that people can change if they want to badly enough." They stayed like that for a moment. The ancient warrior and the young mechanic who had changed each other's lives completely. When they finally separated, Krevthor stood and walked up the ramp. At the top, he turned back. "Remember what I told you. You have a gift, Jiwoo. You see the best in people, even when they cannot see it themselves. Do not lose that. The galaxy needs more people like you. The galaxy needs more people like you too. People who are willing to change, to grow, to be better than their past." Krevthor placed his fist over his chest in the ancient Velkari gesture of respect. "Then I will try to live up to that. Goodbye, small friend. Until we meet again." "Until we meet again," Jiwoo whispered. The ship's door closed. Jiwoo stepped back as the engines powered up. The ship lifted smoothly from the bay and glided out into space. She watched until it was just a tiny point of light among the stars, then until she could not see it at all. Sungmin came to stand beside her. "You okay, yeah?" Jiwoo said, wiping her eyes. "I will be